What's up guys, thanks for tuning in. And as you've heard, GM has officially announced the new Eray, which has a lot of people excited about it, from Corvette fans to potential new buyers. But the question still remains is the Eray better for you than the Z06? And the answer to that might not be as straightforward as you think, especially with the specs that you see on the Eray with 0 to 60 times faster than the Z06. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to bring an engineering perspective to it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, if you haven't heard, the C8 Eray is GM's new Corvette that is going to be the all-wheel drive model, featuring an electric motor powering the front wheels, along with your traditional engine powering the back. Now, GM says that the specs is going to be 655 horsepower combined with 495 horsepower from the LT2 motor, as well as 160 horsepower produced from the electric motor powering the front. And comparably, it's a little bit less than the Z06, which boasts 670 horsepower from its LT6 motor. So the Z06 has more power than the Eray, but the Eray has a faster 0 to 60 time at 2.5 seconds, along with a quarter mile at 10.5 seconds compared to the Z06 that can do the 0 to 60 time in 2.6 seconds and equivalently 10.6 seconds for the quarter mile. The answer comes down to that electric motor producing that all-wheel drive, and that gives you excellent acceleration compared to the Z06 that is rear-wheel drive only. So from an all-wheel drive perspective, the Eray is able to accelerate much faster compared to the Z06, which does have a hard time planting that power down to the road. And it was pretty evident even in our drag race video between this base C8 Stingray versus the Z06. The Z06 still beat out the Stingray, but it definitely took a little bit more effort as compared to the Stingray, which was able to put its power down more efficiently. So the Eray starts just under $103,000 as compared to the Z06, which is just under $106,000. So the difference, I think, is about $2,500 when you compare the base models, but there are some advantages in regards to the Eray that it comes standard with certain things like carbon ceramic brakes, in which the Z06 does not. And so the Eray is still a little bit cheaper, but they're still both $100,000. And comparatively, what you get from them is about the same amount of power and performance. The key is the difference in when that power and such is delivered to you and more readily available. So for the Eray, because of how it's designed, it's going to want to be faster at lower speeds. It's going to be more efficient because the electric motor is going to be working together with the rear engine, as compared to the Z06, which has more difficulties transferring that power to the road at the lower speeds, but will be able to use that power more effectively at higher speeds. Which kind of makes sense because the Eray was designed by GM to be a high performance sports car, but at the same time be more manageable like a daily driver, as compared to the Z06, which has been more designed for track purposes. So higher speeds, more lateral G-forces that it can handle, all those different kind of things. So the way those electric motors work, essentially, they provide their peak power essentially at a standing point where they're not moving, and they're getting that initial torque is the most power that it can output. As the speed progresses, as the RPMs progress for those motors, they start being able to provide less and less power to drive the actual motor, which then peaks at a certain RPM or speed. It's actually part of the reason why you see a lot of EV vehicles that have very impressive accelerations, but their top speeds are kind of limited. And that's because those motors are direct driven to the actual wheels themselves. There's no transmission involved in those. Now, there's certain newer generation EV vehicles that do have a transmission, like the Porsche Taycan has a transmission with its electric motors to get that higher speed. So the actual electric motors themselves, they're RPM peaked rather than drag peak, where the top speed is limited by the actual drag of the car. With the Z06, it has the transmission attached to the motor to actually get the most effectiveness on top speed from the motor, essentially. Now, how the Eray hybrid system is powered by a battery that's actually cleverly placed in the center console. And with that, along with clever placement of the electric motor in the front, you actually don't lose any of your storage capacity in your frunk, and as well as then keep the same in the back, which is amazing that they were able to do that. I honestly thought when the Eray was going to come out that the frunk was going to be at least reduced because of that electric motor and the battery system. But pleasantly, you still keep that, which still keeps your level of practicality, which is great. Now, the Eray also recharges those batteries using your traditional hybrid systems, including getting some of that energy back from the brakes and recharging the battery in those regards. But one of the interesting and new features on the E-Ray is the stealth mode application, where you can start up your E-Ray in stealth mode, which just turns on the electric motors, and you can drive the car for about 3-4 miles at a top speed of about 45, which doesn't kind of sound that impressive, but if you think about it, that is actually a pretty useful thing to potentially have if you're getting up early in the morning and you have to do a cold start on your C8, which is super loud, even if you have a stock exhaust. Being able to have that stealth mode allows you to at least get out of your neighborhood and not bother your neighbors in the early hours of the morning. Like, even if you have a situation when you have like a newborn baby and you don't want your wife to kill you, essentially, I mean, it's a pretty useful feature to have. So another thing to keep in mind from an engineering perspective is the overall build quality. And that's something I do feel I need to bring up in regards to these, because the C8s in general, even as much as I love this car, there's a good amount of quality build issues with these cars that when you bring a new technology from an engineering point, you're gonna run into issues. Even as engineers, we try to make sure that we account for them, but sometimes they just aren't all accounted for. So that's something to keep in mind, that you have a brand new system, and just like the Z06 has some issues with new owners having blown motors even at like 53 miles, there's going to be owners that may potentially run into issues in regards to the electrical system failing on their E-Ray, especially at early production on those kind of models, because the technology has been early tested, but it's not been given by customers that are actually going to really drive it. And that actually brings another point, is the E-Ray going to be something that is modifiable? I would say certain C8 owners are going to want to do certain modifications, like maybe changing out an exhaust system to provide a little bit more power. Is that increase in horsepower on the actual motor side going to affect negatively those electrical systems? I don't think it's going to be anything absolutely detrimental, and I'm not saying that any kind of aftermarket system won't work on an E-Ray, but it's something I would keep in mind, that there might be problems that trying to add extra horsepower to the motor might cause certain issues with the electrical part of the E-Ray. So we talked a little bit about the Z06 and the E-Ray, but what are your thoughts on it? I'd love to know what you think. Would you be going with an E-Ray, or would you be going with a Z06? For me personally, it's a little bit of a toss-up. So my brain and the logical side of me is saying get an E-Ray, it's more practical. It's something that you can work with better as a daily driver kind of deal. But my heart is sitting telling me I want that LT6 motor that provides that beautiful sound as well as that awesome horsepower at the same time. Usually my heart beats out my brain, so I guess I'll lean over to the Z06. So I hope you like this video. If you like this video, please check out any of my other videos like this one here for your C8 or car needs.